New Chicago Bears general manager Lorin Cox and head coach Matt Eberflus have a plan for how they're going to build this team around Justin Fields and the Chicago Bears defense. The only question that remains, will it work? This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm an analyst for Pro Football Focus, and I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and every day. On the show today, we hear from new general manager Lorin Cox and head coach Matt Eberflus at their introductory press conference. We're not going to get into too much about, winning the press conference per se, but more so some of the nuts and bolts. What we learned, some of their plans for this Chicago Bears team on both sides of the ball. Then get a ton of specifics and a ton of details, but it's something. And there's some different pieces in there we can sort of pull out as to what the plan is going to be and whether we feel like it's a good plan, whether we like the plan, whether we think there's some real potential there with that plan. So we'll hear from both of them on what they're going to do with this offense around Justin Fields, what they're going to do with this defense, and what some of the foundational pieces of this philosophy will be for this Bears team. If you notice, I might sound slightly different, and certainly if you're watching on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, you'll notice my background very different. As I mentioned on yesterday's podcast, made it down to Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl this week. Of course, today we're starting with the Bears press conference being the much more pertinent, fresh, new, big Bears news. And really, Tuesday through Thursday are the main Senior Bowl practices where we'll get to watch the players, talk to the players, get some interviews, and we'll turn our attention to a little bit more of the NFL draft type content here in the coming days. But instead, I'm doing this podcast from the hotel room here in Mobile, so it's not my usual setup, but hey, the show must go on, right? So the show is going on with Lorin Cox as the new Bears general manager, and we haven't gotten to hear much specifics yet about the new offensive coordinator, Luke Getsy, and what he's going to do with Justin Fields and what he's going to do with this Bears offense. But we did get a sense of some of the philosophy of how they're going to try and build this team from the general manager on down, particularly when it comes to this offense. And I really thought the answer Lorin Cox gave when asked about what they're specifically going to do around Justin Fields was a lot of what Bears fans have been wanting to hear and strike some contrast, not so much to what we heard from Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, but especially from what we saw on the field and on the roster from Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace. Here's the new Ryan and his approach to building this Bears offense.
I think it starts at the foundation in terms of the O-line and establishing that run game, which then leads to explosive plays. So we got to continue to work on that, get that to a level, and I think you'll start to see more points be scored, and more efficiency, more explosive plays. Everything kind of plays off of that. So that's going to be a focal point.
Building the offensive line and the running game to create explosive plays. Very specific, and also I think a lot of what Bears fans have been wanting to hear, right? We get so frustrated over the years of Matt Nagy not consistently sticking to running the ball, and certainly the offensive line being a problem in Chicago. And all of this is to say that, yes, it's great that Lorin Cox wants to do those things. We still need to actually, see them happen and not just have it be a plan, but actually something that is executed and achieved at a high level. But certainly it's encouraging to feel like the people at the top have the right idea, or at least the idea that we're looking for. And maybe we shouldn't be surprised from a former Bears offensive lineman getting the general manager job, especially also when he rebuilt the offensive line in Kansas City and how big of a priority it was for them there. So all that's very good, and it's sort of old school football style of like, yes, running the ball makes the quarterback's job easier, which then can open up things in the passing game. But I think the thing that struck me the most about Lorin Cox from this whole press conference, and that's sort of the underlying theme here, beyond just the words he actually said, is this balance he's able to strike between that sort of old school hard-nosed football style of like, yes, run the ball, be physical, and then also him being, a younger general manager, come up with multiple organizations, and also valuing the modern football game and understanding analytics and, the modern trends, and not just shooing any of those things away or dismissing them for whatever reason he might not like them. No, he's able to sort of balance the running game and the traditional offensive line building that we're sort of looking for from diverging from what we've seen in Chicago, with how he's going to also add, say, data, for example, into that mix. And I really liked his answer on an analytics question, striking that along with the offensive line and the running game.
In terms of analytics, absolutely. And I've been blown away. There's some great analytic people in here. We've jumped down rabbit holes talking about different things we want to do. So I'm excited about that. It definitely is a part of our process. It's challenging what our eyes see. And I think that's a beautiful thing about all the data that we have now, is we can challenge what we see and then make the proper decision based off of that. I've always used the analogy, I know how to get home, right? But I plug it into Waze anyways, because it might tell me that there's an accident 2 miles up the road. I can go a different direction. I can still get home in a faster time. Why would we not use that information? So I believe in it, and I'm excited to get started with it.
Poles seems to me to have like the exact healthy balance and understanding of analytics, right? You can't outright dismiss them completely. In the analogy he uses there, it's absolutely phenomenal, right? Of course, like he's going to keep an open mind to it, and that's exactly what you want. There is a lot of great value that successful NFL teams are pulling from data and analytics as a part of their evaluation process of players and coaches and their whole organization and their roster. And Poles seems very, very willing to embrace that. But clearly the football side, like the football guy side of him, the former player side, the offensive lineman side, knows that like he's not just going to full on dive into all of that and ignore some of the more conventional ideas and the things that his eyes tell him. So it's being able to balance that and say, you know what, I have these ideas in my brain about football. Here's what the data is saying, and let's see how those things go align, and where, if they are different, why are they different, and what can they do to get the best out of both of them as a result of those things being different. And that's just exactly what a team should do and how they should handle analytics. It's the perfect sort of balance there of getting the most out of analytics that you can, but not over-relying on them, and recognizing that they aren't foolproof and that there are limitations and perhaps sometimes flaws or just things that the data can't accurately, perfectly measure and capture. And that's where, again, his eyes, like you talked about, play a role into that. And so I really think he's got that healthy understanding of how the team should be run in that regard, and then balancing that with the offense, with Justin Fields, with the offensive line, the running game. Again, everything we seem to be looking for here from this Bears organization. It's all about, okay, executing it from there. But at least, hey, first steps out of the gate, laying down a pretty good foundation for a pretty good plan for this Bears offense and the team as a whole. Also getting a little bit more of a sense of what they're going to do defensively, with Matt Eberflus having worked in a number of different schemes. He didn't lay out everything for us, but looks like this Bears defense might be transitioning back to some sort of a 4-3 instead of a 3-4. We'll get into, first we'll hear from the head coach and then get into some of those particular differences when it comes to this Bears defense next on Locked On Bears. We might not have as much football to watch each and every week coming up on the last game of the postseason, but our friends at BetOnline have way more odds and info. Really, they've had it throughout the whole playoffs, but now especially for the big game. From scores, totals, player performance, props, to where the next coach is going to land, BetOnline is the number one spot for all things NFL betting in 2022, especially the big game. There are so many different ways to play it and make it that much more fun for your party with your friends. If you want to have some more stakes on the game and make it that much more exciting, BetOnline is the place to do it. And it's not just for football. They've got basketball, hockey, soccer, boxing, UFC, and all of their coverage is the best of the business, from sports right down to your favorite Vegas casino games. BetOnline is your number one online wagering destination. It's the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports and play your favorite games. BetOnline is where the game starts. This Chicago Bears defense is going to start looking at least a little bit different this coming season, with Matt Eberflus bringing his 4-3 scheme from the Indianapolis Colts to a Chicago Bears roster that has been a 3-4 team ever since Vic Fangio took over in, 2015 after Mel Tucker left. It's been a 3-4 base defense for the last 7 years now of this defense, and all of a sudden that is going to be some level of transition, and this is something that can so easily get overblown. And so I want to start first with Matt Eberflus's short answer as to asking, hey, is this going to be a 4-3 defense, 3-4, how you want to balance those things, and then we can get in a little bit more specifically why it's not nearly as a big deal as you might think it is, or as Bears fans are certainly going to make it out to be at first, and we'll try and really sort of tap the brakes on any sort of panicking or worry about drastic changes happening in this Bears defense. First, though, Coach Eberflus gets to explain his side.
Yeah, so this will be the third time that we switch, from a 3-4 to a 4-3, or that I've been involved in that switch over. But will we have elements and pieces of a 3-4? Sure, we have that. We're going to adjust and move and be flexible. We're going to look at the talents and skill level of the players we have, and we're going to coach and develop those guys. And we'll fit our scheme around those players. But the foundational pieces won't change in terms of how we play.
First and foremost, in other parts of the press conference, which was like an hour and a half long, I can't play the whole thing for you here on the podcast. He talked a lot about, they're not going to just force individual players into schemes, right? They're going to build the plays and the schemes and the formations and everything around the talent of the players that they do have. So I guess that's the first point, is that even if, which we'll get into, that even if there were drastic differences in 4-3 versus 3-4 and whether or not players are going to fit in those things, they're not just going to take someone and move them to a position where they're not comfortable or not going to be able to be successful. That's not the plan that these guys are laying out. And so I think along with that, then, it's important to remember that the differences between the 4-3 and the 3-4 are very limited, and also specifically in Eberflus's scheme, it's not going to be all that drastic of a change. So first and foremost, in the Colts defense under Eberflus in the last few seasons, they've been among the league leaders in the NFL in percentage of their snaps in their nickel defense package, with 4 down linemen and 2 linebackers. That's exactly what the Bears nickel. Every team's nickel packages are essentially the same alignments, right? Whether the outside linebackers are standing up or have their hand in the dirt, they're in the exact same position. Whether it's a 4-3 team with defensive ends or a 3-4 team with outside linebackers, when they're in the nickel, the 2 interior guys are pretty much in the same spots. The edge guys are standing at pretty much in the same spots, and the linebackers have almost exactly the exact same roles. And so, 70+% of the time, Eberflus's defense stays in that nickel package anyway, with a 6-man front, and so it's going to be literally no different for any of the guys up in that. Maybe sometimes it'll be more of Robert Quinn and Khalil Mack with their hands in the dirt, but lo and behold, both of them played a lot of their careers in 4-3 defenses with the hand in the dirt, so it shouldn't be a particularly huge transition for them. Same thing with some of the interior defensive linemen. In that nickel package, typically your defensive line has a nose tackle at a 1 technique and a defensive tackle at a 3 technique. Well, that's what the Bears nickel has looked like in a 3-4 under Vic Fangio, and then Chuck Pagano, and then Sean Desai, right? Same alignment for the defensive line. So it's not going to be any sort of different responsibility there. Linebacker spot, the difference might be that, instead of having 3 defensive linemen on the interior, you're going to have 3 off-ball linebackers, and so you are adding a player in some of those packages a very small percentage of the time to that end. But the linebackers the Bears do have, with Roquan and Danny Trevathan, depending on what's going to happen with him, and certainly Alec Ogletree, right? Like, the off-ball linebacker in the 3-4 tends to be a little bit more fluid and a little bit, shifting in terms of lining up in a lot of different gaps and having to be responsible for any and all different ways the play could go. It's not so much like the 4-3. You think like Brian Urlacher as the middle linebacker, and he's responsible for the middle. That's why in the 3-4 we call them inside linebackers, because inside can be pretty much anywhere in between those offensive tackles, as opposed to like Urlacher's middle linebacker position it's much more, even more limited, right? To more like between the guards tends to be, generally speaking, where they line up. And so then the outside linebackers might span a little bit wider, but even in the 3-4, right, we've seen Roquan Smith have to go out and cover the slot a little bit, or even Danny Trevathan they're not going all the way to the slot, but they're lining up farther outside of the box in that defense. So it's not going to be asking your linebackers to really do anything brand new. It's not going to be asking your defensive ends / edge rushers to be doing anything brand new, and it's not going to be asking your defensive tackles to be doing anything brand new. The entire front 7 will look different in exactly the arrangement they all happen to be in compared to how they happen to be in Sean Desai, Vic Fangio defense. But their responsibilities, like as far as learning new things, like of course, Matt Eberflus is going to have new terminology and new play calls, but like the actual like football skills, fundamentals of what they're being asked to do, no matter how they're going to call it, what the play is going to be, or what the terms are going to be, You're not asking Roquan Smith to learn a new way to play linebacker. You're not asking Khalil Mack to learn a new way to play edge rusher, defensive end, outside linebacker. You're not asking, I guess I was going to say Akeem Hicks, but he'd not be back. But Eddie Goldman, he might not be back either. I'm not going to ask Bilal Nichols, I guess, to learn a new defensive line technique, a new defensive line front. Right? It doesn't have to be this crazy brand new transition for anybody involved. So not only is it infrequent when they might line up differently, but also when they do line up differently, it's not going to be that much of an ask for the players already on the roster. Plus, like Eberflus said, there's elements of the 3-4 there. It's a little bit more of a hybrid front. Sometimes, they might stand up Mack and Quinn, or they might bring another linebacker down and might show some different things up front. They're not just going to be Lovie Smith 4-3 defense, same guys line up in the same position, and you just rotate new bodies in there on the defensive line, right? It's much more fluid than that in the front seven, and that's what I'm expecting from this Bears defense. If anything, maybe it will be more comfortable for Robert Quinn, and I think Khalil Mack can kind of do whatever, but like that was one of the questions when Quinn first came over. It's like he hasn't really played much stand-up outside linebacker in his career. Certainly figured it out last year and set the franchise record and all that, so like maybe bad timing to switch him back to a 4-3, but more so like we've seen him be great in the 4-3. Now we've seen him be great in the 3-4. He can do both, right? I don't think that's been relevant in how well he's produced, has not been necessarily related specifically to the scheme. It's more so, what is the coach going to ask of him in terms of run support and run defense and pass rushing and stunting and looping, and how often is he going to get chipped by tight ends and all the other things that are separate from how specifically is he aligned on the play. So hopefully trying to calm any of the uneasiness, or panic's too extreme of a word for like a 4-3-3-4 switch, but like it just feels like one of those like sports radio talking points, but like football people know it's not a huge difference, and hopefully that's what I'm trying to convey to you, is that to say, hey, we're going a little bit deeper than that here on the Locked On Bears podcast. I want to go a little bit deeper also into some of the philosophies of Eberflus, and again, not trying to get into too much of this like, did they win the press conference and say all the right things, but I did really like some of the specific details of his plan for how to instill the type of culture, leadership, and philosophy he wants this Bears team to have. We'll go through the HITS method, the acronym, and some of the different things we've been able to pick up about Matt Eberflus next on Locked On Bears. The new GM and head coach are still getting to know all of the different parts of this Chicago Bears roster and organization. And if you need to get to know some new parts, then our friends at RockAuto.com are the place for you. They've got the largest selection anywhere I've seen online of auto parts. Their catalog is incredible. It's super deep, but it's also really easy to navigate. That you just enter in your car's make and model, and boom, pulls up all the different parts available for your vehicle, and then you can sort between the brands, specifications, and prices you prefer. It'll save you time to be able to find exactly what you're looking for. It'll save you money, because when you go to the auto parts store, most of the time those people are just looking up things on their computer and ordering it for you anyway. And RockAuto.com's prices are up to the auto parts stores are up to twice as much as what you can pay at RockAuto. It's up to half off with RockAuto compared to paying some of the overhead fees of those traditional storefronts and a cashier and employees and all that different stuff. Plus, RockAuto is a family business. They've been serving auto parts customers and do-it-yourselfers online for over 20 years. Their parts are the same for everybody. You're not getting a special deal if you're a mechanic or some kind of in the industry. Same prices for everybody, always reliably low. So head on over to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. When you get to their How Did You Hear About Us box, write in the words Locked On so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. One of the things we knew about Matt Eberflus when the Bears hired him was how he's known more for like culture and leadership and fundamentals, as opposed to specifically like genius innovator X's and O's guy, right? Not that he's a bad X's and O's guy, but like he's known for the players buying in and trusting him and buying into each other and having that sort of feel among that team. And so I was curious, how well he would be able to communicate that at a press conference and how well it would go over, not necessarily like for the players, but like for me, for you, for anybody listening. Does it feel hollow? Does it feel like buzzwords? Does it feel like, all talk? Is it just sort of saying what he's supposed to say and what you want to hear? Or does it feel like there's some substance behind it? And, I really tried to go into it open-minded. And I was left, I think, the way I was left at the end was like, it felt in the similar vein to what Dan Campbell did for Detroit in that press conference, just like without the coffee, right? Without the people were making the jokes about, like hard drugs that go in your nose, for example, like those kind of things. Like Matt Campbell came out, or Dan Campbell. Matt Campbell's at Iowa State. Dan the man Campbell at the Lions came out saying, and we're going to bite their kneecaps off and we're going to get up. And I mean, it was this like, felt really like almost fake bravado, tough guy. Like, we're going to be tough and here's how tough and hyped up and energetic we are, right? And it was just like, it felt like a gimmick. Like, it felt like a joke in Detroit. Like, I felt bad for Lions fans. Like, oh, this guy, like, is that going to go over well? It just feels like NFL players are like adults and men who need to be just treated like normally. And this felt more like showy with Dan Campbell in Detroit. And so like Eberflus to me felt like some of the things that Campbell was trying to get across that are like legitimate and valuable without any of that extra just over the topness. And that's what I really appreciated about Eberflus. And then more specifically, as we're about to hear here, how much he talks about measuring things and things that we don't necessarily typically think of measuring. And like with Dan Campbell, when he talks about we're going to be tough and we're going to be physical. Well, what does that mean? How can you tell? How are you going to be able to enforce that and hold people accountable for being tough and physical? And it seems like Matt Eberflus, he's got a much more of a plan for like how everyone's going to be on the same page, and therefore how you're going to be accountable and how everybody's going to buy in to his foundational philosophies.
People always ask, hey, how do you get a football team to play hard, to play fast, to play physical, to know exactly what they're supposed to do? How do you do that? That's always a question that I get asked, and it's a foundational piece. So what we want to do is build the foundation, okay? In this first year, we want to build this foundation of what we're going to look like, okay, of what Chicago fans, alumni, okay, can be proud of. And the foundational pieces are hustle, effort. We're going to be an effort-based team, okay? That's the number one piece. And we're going to have measurable ways for standards of performance that are going to be detailed. Every single rep, every single practice, every single game. It's going to be an effort-based team. So that's the H part, okay, to our HITS principle, okay? The next thing is the I. The I is intensity. We will play with maximum intensity. That's focus, okay, mental focus and intensity, but also physical focus and intensity. The toughness we're talking about for the Chicago Bears, it's a hitting physical style. Offense, defense, kicking. So that's going to be the second foundational piece. And we'll measure those. We have ways to measure them and be very detailed with those. The next T is taking care of the ball and taking the ball away. It's all about the ball. It's all about the ball. That's the most important thing for winning and losing, is taking the ball away and protecting the football. So that's the T. And then the last one is S, okay, is being smart situational players. So smart is really being what? No stupid penalties. Make sure we're squared away with the penalties. Should be in the top 5 every year in penalties. Okay, the next thing is situations. Okay, being great in red zone, third down, 2-minute, okay, backed up, and being smart situational players. So hustle, intensity, taking care of the football, taking it away, and being smart situational players. Those will be the foundational pieces that we can measure, and I'm excited about getting to work with the coaches, okay? Once we get our coaching staff in here and developing that with the coaches, okay, and also developing it with the players.
What we heard from Eberflus there echoes a lot of what we heard from, was it on last week's podcast with Evan Sidery from Locked On Colts, who broke down everything we kind of knew about Eberflus from Indianapolis, from covering the team. If you haven't heard that podcast, please make sure you go back and listen to it, because there's a lot of really good stuff in there, and it was sort of a sneak peek of some of the things Eberflus talked about there. But something Evan added on that's in the same family of that HITS, the HITS that Eberflus was just talking about there, was that in Indianapolis, Eberflus had what was called, I don't think Evan called it a loaf chart. And I was like, loaf chart? Like when they see somebody loafing on tape, not sprinting as hard as they need to, not hustling the way they should, not finishing the play to the whistle, goes up on a board. It goes on a chart, and every player can see it. And it's not so much like, trying to single out anybody, but it's just everyone's holding everyone accountable. And that's how you get everyone to buy in. And it's another one of those ways of like, how you measure it, right? You're not like measuring, it's not like an analytics thing where it's like, miles per hour ran in a game and who's running the most miles per hour to show the most effort. No, it's just like, are you seeing on tape, are these guys giving effort or not? And being deliberate about tracking that when you do see it and when you don't see it, and how that really does seem to be the types of foundational things you're looking for in a head coach, and to be able to instill a philosophy, an idea, a foundation for how a team should be and should be run. And I think that's great, and it's encouraging, and it's refreshing, and I think it's very different, or it's not drastically different, but it's just, I don't know, it did feel contrasting to some of just the ways Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy would talk about things, where it just tended to be a lot of like, trust us, like we're gonna dig into the whys, and we're gonna find out why, and then we're gonna fix it. And more like with Eberflus, it's like, no, we're gonna measure it, and we're gonna have data. Like, we're gonna be able to look at this measurement and say, see, here's how we're doing, here's how we're accomplishing it, because we are actually measuring it, and we'll have some way to be able to hold it up and have accountability and all those different things that just never quite fully felt like they were there under Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace. Again, does that equal Super Bowl then? is that it? We don't know, right? That's the whole point. That's what we're looking to figure out. And I'm not ready to just like crown Eberflus as like this genius head coach who's therefore he won the press conference and is going to lead the Bears to the playoffs, the Super Bowl, and all these different things. Certainly, Ryan Poles and the personnel are going to play a factor in that. And I also think, there is also more to football than just leadership and toughness. Those are all really good things that the Bears have been lacking, and we want to see more of. And I think it's part of why we saw Eberflus get hired in the first place. But I'm curious to see if the X's and O's and on the field production then follows that, because you could see a scenario where they band together and they have a good talent, and then the new offensive and defensive coordinators add some wrinkles in there, and boom, it all works to a magical formula. You could also see where it's like they could still be a disciplined, well-run leadership team, but you could see there being a ceiling there, or a lower ceiling. Like you could see where like this foundation feels like a high floor, where it's like this is not a team that's gonna like implode and win 4 games and have fights in the locker room because there's no structure or leadership, right? That's all gonna be there. It's just a matter of what the ceiling is from there, and that's gonna be about personnel. That's gonna be about coaching schemes and all those different things. And that's what I'm so excited to learn more about this offseason as we get to know Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles more. Certainly we'll be breaking them down as much as we can, as much information as we can get right here in the Locked On Bears podcast, coming at you 5 days a week. So I hope that you'll subscribe to keep up with all of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and every day. Every day the rest of this week, We'll be talking Senior Bowl. I mean, certainly if there's big Bears news in between, we'll get into some of that. But NFL draft prospects from a Bears perspective, some guys should be looking at. We'll try and get some guests on that are in person down here. So a rare in-person Locked On Bears podcast guest on the video form as well. I think I'm not going to make any specific promises just yet, but there's a lot of friends in the industry around here. I've already seen a couple of them since we've been down here. Going to try and get them on the pod. So lots of goodies this week. Hope you'll keep tuning in, keep coming back, and most importantly, I hope the Locked On Bears podcast helps you bear down.